Well, on behalf of the BC Brain Wellness Program, I am excited to bring to our space Diana Drasic and her talk on must-have conversations when living with neurological challenges. Now, Diana's bio is on the website, but briefly, she is a retired assistant professor at McMaster University with over 30 years of experience as a palliative care clinician. And really, she continues to support families and organizations who require or who request kind of direct care guidance and knowledge in this field. And I came to Diana via a webinar that she did for Baycrest in Toronto, and really felt that this was such an important topic and that this would really be something that our community, our brain wellness care partner community, would enjoy. So with that, welcome, Diana, and thank you for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Elaine, and thank you everyone for attending this this session in particular, because I think it's a very difficult session. I have not only provided care to people with all kinds of illnesses over my many, many years in healthcare, but I also live with a child with neurological conditions. So I have firsthand knowledge as a caregiver, someone who loves someone who is living with ongoing, life-gone, never going to end issues. And so I understand that from my perspective as a caregiver, and that may be very different from your perspective as a caregiver. But I will share some things that I've learned along the way as well. So this is not just a clinical conversation. It's not coming at it from that perspective necessarily, but also from a personal one. Okay? And so here, when we're looking at what are we going to be talking about throughout this session, what am I going to be touching on? So I'm going to be talking about not healthcare conditions, because there's over 600 types of neurological issues, as you know, different things that people live with. I'm going to focus more on what brings us all together when we're dealing with all of these very myriad and complex issues that may result, my son has 3 or 4, depending on how you define them, neurologically based problems, issues, conditions, and yet they're not related. And how can that be? Because our brain is so technical, and something that I think in our bodies, it's the last thing that we're ever going to understand until we start to look at the soul. And I don't think we're ever going to get there. At least I hope we don't. So we're going to look at what brings us all together. What are some of the common changes, challenges, frustrations, uncertainties, the realities that we have to deal with day in, day out? What are we living with now? What's coming down the road? Then on top of that, we have to look at who's around us, who's of help to us, who isn't. Are we able to help ourselves? What are the cultural and social influences that help us or hinder us in our day-to-day choices and what we choose to communicate, what we choose to share, or we don't? So multiple, very complex conversations with multiple people. And on top of everything, stuff happens. Care needs can change at any time. Crises happen at any time. The caregiver gets sick. So you may be plodding on and then you may get sick, or you may die. And then what's going to happen to your loved one? People don't realize how expensive illness is until you're living with it. And as you are all living with it, you know that there are a lot of hidden expenses, things that you don't count on. I counted on working as a full-time clinician for my entire career. Well, that got cut short when my Jonathan was born. So finances change, and your social circle that you had, you're going to find that depletes and comes down to the core of who's going to be there for you, who's not going to be there for you, and who is available to you within your circle, within your family, within your community, within the healthcare system. Who's there? And on top of everything else, you have to rely on yourself. And really, when we're talking about having conversations with regard to any of these things, it can get really tricky. And in my experience, conversations are just landmines. There are all of these elephants in the room. There are things we don't want to talk about, things we don't want to acknowledge, things change, and we're bewildered and we don't know how to handle it. So I'm going to tell you a little story about a lady I know. I'm just going to call her Grandma. And Grandma's 86 years old, and she lived a very full and very busy life devoted to her children, her family, her community, her faith group. She's now alone and living with a severe mobility impairment condition, fully intact intellectually. She lived a minimum 1.5 hours drive to her closest adult child. And so with pressure from her family, she decided to move in with one of those children, sold her home and moved there. Think about it. She no longer has her community. She no longer has her faith group. Everything that tied her to community is gone. She's in a new place and she's alone. So after her family with these high-powered jobs come home, their kids are in university, they're working, they're planning their next stage of their life, they're busy. And Grandma's alone. She's in this house basically alone all day. And due to loneliness and lack of purpose, the power couples, so 6 children, 3 power couples among the 6 children, decided that, you know what, Grandma's starting to dither. She's starting to forget things. And so they began to question her capacity and put pressure on her, not only to hand over power of attorney for finances, but also power of attorney for personal care and health care. And these are very, very different matters. And what she found out was that the executor of her will was accessing her will and talking with the other power couples about how they were going to change the will and how they were looking at facilities to put Grandma in. With the help of the other 3 children and myself, Grandma saw a lawyer who reviewed with her rights, and she began to change her living arrangements. So she's now living with another child where she is thriving. And here's an example of how well Grandma's doing. Grandma doesn't need to be in a facility. Grandma's whole and healthy and strong. And here are the little piglets because they're farmers. And she started a scooter club because they get around on their scooters. And they have races and stuff on with their scooters. So when they go to the mall, it's quite a sight. So she's thriving. And as Viktor Frankl reminds us, everything can be taken away from us at a moment. But there's one thing that can never be taken away from us as long as we have conscious thought, and that is our attitude. Okay? No one can take that away from us. There's a lot of decisions, a lot of choices, a lot of landmines. Do you understand the risks and benefits of the choices and decisions that you're being asked to make? Can you process the consequences? So if you can understand the risks, the benefits, be able to identify possible consequences, then you are capable of making medical and legal decisions. So when you're looking at this kind of stuff, people think, oh, I need a lawyer, I need a lawyer. You don't necessarily need a lawyer if you are surrounded by people who know what you want and are true to you. And this we will explore just very, very briefly because it's a big part of conversations. You may think you're prepared for conversations, and then you'll find out you start it and no, this person's going to throw curveballs at you. So major things. First, overall, who is a power of attorney? What does a power of attorney mean? There are different kinds of power of attorney. Power of attorney for healthcare, not for healthcare, for personal care. That's different than healthcare. Power of attorney for finances. power, and then there is things like substitute decision makers, okay? So what do all of these things mean? If you don't know exactly what they mean in your province, look it up, because you'll need that definition. So I'm basically giving you the overall summary here, as when we're looking at these kinds of things, who's in charge now of making decisions, who's going to be in charge. You need to look at future living arrangements. Don't want to look at it. My kid, I'm hoping, is 20 years out, if I can survive him that long, for getting into housing options for him. He'll need to go into some type of group home. And it's scary. It's very, very scary. If you want to have a choice on where your loved one goes, you need to start doing that work now and try to get yourself on a waiting list specific to that facility. Good luck with that, because if you go through regular channels, you're going to have to go on the waiting list. And the next bed that comes, if you leave it till it's an emergency, the next bed that comes up, that bed is yours, no matter where it is. So this stuff can be expensive, but don't get drawn into things like necessarily retirement living. Retirement living looks great on the surface, costs a bundle. If you want a social group, join the mall walk, other things that will get you involved socially with people. And when you're looking at what is that transition going to be looking like, long-term care is your best option, because in long-term care, you will receive ongoing care. And as your care needs change, they have the capacity to adjust and change how they provide care for you. So let's say from being, if your lifespan was this length, so here's where you were born, here's where you're going to die. When do you want to enter long-term care? Hopefully as close to here as possible. That's when you want to be in a facility that can handle your needs when you are admitted, and will be able to handle them as they change and you approach end of life. All right. So who gets to decide all this stuff? Well, we assume, as I said, that if you are over 18, and in fact, in specific situations when you are much younger, that if you understand what's going on and you've lived with it. And I worked with kids with cystic fibrosis at a time when they didn't live beyond the age of 16 to 18. They knew what was coming. They were fully capable of making choices and decisions about their life and how they wanted to live and how they wanted to die, because they'd seen it around them their entire lives. So what I put here is Ontario law. It comes from the medical capacity page from the government, only because I know, having studied both and looked at both, that ours is very similar to BC. In fact, they're almost identical. The only thing is this language I found was easier to access and quicker to access, and that's why I've put it there for you. And these are some of the websites that you'll find useful and helpful in BC, all right, to help you to look at these different things. And if you have someone who is going to live, who's much younger than you are, who's going to live perhaps many, many years after you are gone, then you may want to look at something like a Henson Trust. But you have to understand the ins and outs of a Henson Trust and how that can be used to protect and finance your child or your loved one in the future. So here's my motto for all of this kind of stuff, because it's really, really tough, is that I go into any situation and I try to frame my mind so that I go into every day, I'm going to expect the best, and I'm going to plan for the worst, because that's what seems to happen in my life. And what I've come to learn over the years in my reading and stuff is that there is a difference between happiness and joy. That happiness is this fleeting emotion. You recognize when you're happy, when you're no longer happy. But to live a life of joy, to live a life of appreciation, is a different thing. My son is not the child I wanted him to be. He's a child, he is, and he's very, very special. And I learned so much from him, much more, than I've ever taught anybody. I have learned from my son. So the serenity prayer is always at the back of my mind, especially when I'm having a bad day with Jonathan. Who can you call on for help when you need it? And I don't know about you, but I'll shut down when I am overwhelmed. And I think for some of us, it's harder to reach out. But who can you call on? Think about that. Who's going to be there for you? When we first came to understand that Jonathan had multiple neurological issues, my family doctor just looked at me and said, I don't know anything about this. And basically the attitude was, I don't want to learn. I don't want to have anything to do with this. So I only bring Jonathan to my doctor, the family doctor, if he has a cold or pneumonia or something. In BC, you have access to 811 to call for medical help and guidance, okay? What kind of programs do you have? You're linked into this one. Are you aware of other programs that might be of service to you online or within your own community? And if you are lucky enough to know someone who can navigate the tech world, the internet system, more power to you. Use them mercilessly to navigate the system for you, to find the websites that are going to provide you with the information that you need. And as I said, your community, your social network changes over time. And as we age and we deal with more and more complex issues, our social world our social circle diminishes. How can we build community, sustainable community that's going to help ourselves? So if you can learn to navigate the internet, go to those websites that I gave you, look at some of the other ones that you're going to get through Elaine and Brain Health. And when you have a question, don't be shy about asking your question. If you don't understand what something means, ask for a timeout or a hand that says stop. This says stop. This is timeout. This means I need a break. This means you stop talking. I need to think, or I need to say something, okay? So write out the questions that you have. Ask your questions then to the appropriate person, and if possible, record the answers or have someone you trust with you, someone with a good memory who also can remember perhaps things that you forgot or were not clear to you, or perhaps heard it in a different way, okay? Think about it, and then if you have more questions, go back, okay? So what is your current knowledge of the conditions with which you are all living? Do you understand what that transitioning is going to be like over time with this condition? Because the goals change, you know, you get settled into this one mode, and then it all changes on you, and sometimes just overnight. It can change on you. Do you recognize the stages of late and end stage illness? Are people clear in how they're speaking with you so that you know that you are transitioning into those phases of life? And who's going to be with you during this process? And when you're speaking with your loved ones living with these neurological conditions, there are so many challenges, so many gifts that they give us, so many things they teach us, and there are so many day-to-day challenges that come with them. And a lot of them we've already talked about, and all of them, every single one of these things is a landmine. They really are, and they may take time, and there may not be time. You hope there's time, and there may not be. So here is, we'll call her Oma in the middle, and Oma is feeding her great-grandchild. Is that right? Yes, that's her great-grandchild. surrounded by her mom and grandma, because this is, of course, complex family dynamics. And within the space of a year, Grandma Oma went from this to this. Okay. And here, it was too late for any meaningful conversations. Things had changed far too quickly for my husband and his brother to really get a handle on what was changing with their mom and where she was and what was coming next. Okay. So a lot of this we've already looked at. On top of everything that you are dealing with and experiencing, there's grief. And there are many, many kinds of grief. There's anticipatory grief, and that is anticipating the changes that are coming, the challenges that are coming, the death that is coming, any of those things. It's a way that you prepare for that eventuality, and when it happens, you're still not prepared. But it's helping you to process it. Ambiguous grief, very complex. The person that you love is there, but the wholeness of them is no longer there. Who you knew, who you wanted, who you dreamt they'd be, is not there. And so there are many, many losses that we live with. And some of them we acknowledge, and some we don't acknowledge. Just for clarification, if you go to, if you look up substitute decision maker, BC, you're going to find a definition very similar to this. Substitute decision maker versus a power of attorney for personal care. A power of attorney for personal care, a POA, will decide where you live, what you'll eat, how you'll be dressed, that kind of thing, day-to-day decision making. The substitute decision maker here makes decisions directly about your health care, okay, it's such as medication, surgery, etc. Okay, they may be the same person, they may be different people, they may be multiple people, depending upon what you think is best for you and or your loved one. So what we want to be able to do when we're communicating about anything and with anyone is we want to be communicating well enough that we don't burn any bridges, and we want to be able to deal with what's happening now, and we want to prepare for what's happening tomorrow. And in our conversations, and we hope in the conversations of which we are the recipients, that we have accuracy, but also kindness. And here I like the saying from Mike Barnes. He's a journalist who wrote a small book, an easy to read book, with pearls of wisdom on each page, called Letters to a Caregiver, about his journey living with his mom with dementia. It's a lovely, lovely story about the need for balance in communication. And here's something else that I found very helpful, is the 5 Chairs communication on YouTube from Louise Evans. And this was something that she points out in her talk. Are you coming from a place of love and caring? Do you want a relationship with this person? Or do you want to be right, or the smartest person in the room, whatever? There is a need for balance in our conversation and our communication. What we're hoping for is the top left, where we have high honesty with high kindness, let's put it, with very high kindness. When we try to be kind, sometimes we soften the message too much. And you have to go back and what did you hear and what did you actually understand? I've listened to doctors tell people basically that their loved ones is stable right now. What does stable mean in the healthcare world versus your world? And the family thinking that their loved one's getting better. The doctors didn't say your loved one's getting better. Your doctor said nothing's changed. They're still on this course to wherever they're going to end up. but that's not what the recipient hears. So what are you hearing? What are you not hearing? And people who just say everything's going to be fine when it's not, they're trying to be kind. That's not kindness, not in my world. And there are cultures where it's not common to talk about illness, where you do not talk about dying. And yet we find when we ask the individual can tell us, if we ask with kindness, very clearly whom they want to make decisions on their behalf. Do they want to make their own decisions, or do they want their families to make decisions about what's going to happen? Do they want to know what we think is going to happen, or do they want their family to make choices and decisions on their behalf? Okay. And we experience all of these things very, very differently. The words we use matter, and it's really important that we ensure common understanding. I think I spent the first 10 years of my life as a healthcare translator, translating between medical specialists and the people we were trying to serve, because doctors speak in their own, specialists particularly would speak in their own language, and families would be there nodding and smiling and not understanding a single word the doctor said. Someone paid my son a compliment the other day, and Jonathan just looked at my father and I, and because we said, we said, Jonathan, isn't that so nice? They gave you a compliment. And he looked at us and he said, I don't even know what that is. That's the longest sentence structure I think I've ever heard from Jonathan. To be able to say it that clearly, but to be able to say he didn't know what that word meant. So I have to remember that his understanding of language is very different than mine. When we say that something is progressing, what do we mean? If I say that a child is progressing in school, if I say you're progressing very well with your therapy, that means you're getting better, you're moving on to the next stage. When an illness is progressing, that's different. That means it's worsening, okay? So how do we understand the same language? And stable and unchanged mean basically, we're here, nothing much has changed, we're just right here, that's all it means. We're afraid of the word palliate. We're afraid of palliative care. Don't be afraid of palliative care. To palliate means to reduce or eliminate. What we want to do is we're trying really hard to reduce and eliminate symptoms and ease the suffering that's occurring as much as is possible. That's what we're looking for. And again, do you understand what these other terms mean? CPR, DNR, resuscitation, no code. What do they mean? They mean that your heart has stopped, but different things happen according to what stage you're in. Resuscitation does not necessarily mean that your heart has stopped. What does it mean? So talk to your doctors about this stuff. If you're not clear about what kind of care you might want at end of life, because seriously, timing matters, and you don't want to be making choices and decisions when you're in crisis, okay? Tough, it's all really tough. It's really, really need to spend the time working through the emotions, thinking it through to prepare. What do you have control over? What belongs to you? What can you perhaps influence with kindness? What are the goals and objectives you want to achieve? And how are you going to use conversation to help achieve those goals and objectives? So take the time to reflect and be present in a conversation. It's very easy to just go off into your own headspace. To be present with someone else means that you are 100% focused on them and their needs. In a real essence, time stops. It's of no matter. Your focus, your presence is on the other person or the conversation, the group, okay? So we're going to talk about a couple of do's and don'ts before we get to some of the meat and potatoes of conversations, a couple of tools that I think you'll find very helpful in hearing conversation and structuring conversations. And rule number one, always, 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 your heart comes before your head, each and every time, okay? Emotion before logic. We think, we feel before we think, okay? It starts at the heart and ends up in the brain. So remember that what you feel right in this instant may not be what should be coming out of your mouth, okay? Here's a really useful phrase that I like that addresses both emotion and logic. For people who think they're only logic and are not emotional, and you find you can hear the emotion in how they're speaking. Are they speaking with anger? Are they speaking with anyway, in terms of the pattern of how people speak. So here's one of my favorite things is, what are you feeling that makes you think? Okay. Can you help me to understand? Very short, succinct sentences. That's the best way I find to communicate with anyone, and particularly with people with any kind of condition that affects their processing and their ability to reason and think things through. When you're living with someone with a neurological condition, it can be very difficult, very challenging. Keep the past out of it. If things changed, a head injury, a stroke, certain kinds of conditions where the personality changes almost overnight, try to keep what was out of what's here. You can grieve for what's lost, for what's no longer. This is now, and this is what we're dealing with. And we're only in control of our immediate responses, nothing else. And the two tools that I spoke about were both listed at the end of that slide, that previous slide. So here are a couple of other conversational tips that I use. Can you help me to understand what you know about your loved one's condition? So that's something that, as a healthcare provider, I would ask you. Can you help me to understand what you know? Ask for you with your loved one, can you help me to understand what you know about your condition? And you may be very surprised at what they do or do not know or understand about their condition. Using language again, neurodegenerative, what does that mean? Neurodegenerative means that things over time shrink down and worsen in a sense, okay? So a terminal neurodegenerative condition means that you may live a long time with it, but over time, the function, the neurocognitive function is going to is going to worsen, is going to decrease and minimize over time. Okay. And the other things we've reviewed, the need for a timeout or just a stop. I can't handle anymore, can't process anymore, I need a break. This model, you can tell it's written by academics because, you know, we've got to use 6 words when one will do. Traumatic brain injury model system. And I just pulled this up. It's been updated a while ago. This is the most current one that's available. And so I think it's not just, it doesn't just apply to traumatic brain injury. It's something that you can use for any illness, any condition. I found it very, very helpful, actually. And with this tool, we're looking again at what are we hoping to achieve with this conversation? What are we looking for? What are our goals? The plan, working out a plan, taking the time, brainstorming things with people. Talk to other people about your ideas, particularly and especially if you have access to other people who are living perhaps not with your condition, because nobody's living with your condition, but with similar things. The first time that I called Special Olympics to see if my son would be able to join one of their programs, and I said, well, you know, he's special needs. And the other person on the phone just laughed at me, and she said, well, welcome to the club. You know, because I knew nothing about Special Olympics at that time, and they've become a big part of my son and my world at this point in time. So who can you brainstorm with? Other people who live with other situations within your sphere. And again, always check it out. Did it work? Did it not work? Go back to the beginning. And when you are working with someone who has, in medical terms, we call it impaired executive functioning, reasoning, judgment, memory, problem solving, self-awareness, all of these things may be challenged by any kind of neurological condition. With Jonathan, he may remember one word in the morning, forget it in the afternoon. Concepts of any type are beyond him. The idea of having a bank balance, a bank account, to Jonathan means money grows on trees. And there's no winter in Jonathan's world. There are always trees with leaves in his world. Yesterday, today, tomorrow, last week, last year, next month, next year. He doesn't understand what those things mean. They have no meaning for him. So how does your loved one process? How can you help them to best find solutions to problems using communication, remembering your own emotions and frustrations, to help them to recognize what they may likely be experiencing and how you can help. Okay. Behaviors can be a huge issue. It is in my world. It may or may not be in your world. Look for help with that, because other people are living with the same thing. I count our seasons, 4 seasons of the year, I count them by how many new holes are in my wall, okay? When he gets frustrated or angry, he is a big guy. He will break the drywall. So that's part of reality, and part of my 4 times a year, we go around, fix up the holes. How many did we get this quarter? Okay. So how can we help our loved ones to get better? Call people that we think are going to help us. If your loved one has the capacity, work through step-by-step problem solving. Talk to the specialists, and mostly to the therapists, the social workers, the therapists, who may be able to give you suggestions based on what they've seen helped other families in the past. And here again, just some other actions to take, which basically follow the same thing. And again, keep personalities out of it. What comes out of your loved one's mouth may not be what they mean, or they may mean it in that absolute moment. May not be something you want to hear. Don't take it personally. It's coming from a place where, like, you're being tied down in a bed, and the only recourse you have is what comes out of your mouth, and without the social filters that we usually apply or have learned over time to apply to how we act and how we speak. In the case of delirium here, for example, delirium is when your body chemistry goes out of whack, and it will cause people often to hallucinate. And sometimes people will get very distressed and distraught. Other times it's quite peaceful. They're seeing something quite lovely, and they're happy there. And if it's something like spiders on the wall, oh, I'm afraid of spiders on the wall, get the broom and sweep them. Wherever the loved one tells you that the spiders are, and sweep to get rid of those spiders. So trying to find that, can you see and hear where they are? Can we acknowledge what they're feeling at that time by staying calm? Okay, to always to stay as calm as possible, not always easy in my world, but necessary and vital, and never respond to any kind of escalation with increased escalation yourself. Okay, and we talked about this, the need for timeout, the need to just say, stop, I need a break. So when our loved ones go to sessions, we should, if we can, if they give their permission, be there as well, so that we can help to reinforce what the therapist is working on with them. And therapy is not always easy, as you know, if you've been on the receiving end of therapy yourself. You have to do sometimes some hard work before you're able to reap the benefits. And with neurological impairments, you need time to process. You need sometimes a lot of extra time, one thing at a time. For many years, I don't use the word no with Jonathan. He has oppositional defiance. And as soon as he hears no, he's going to react to that. And so I never say no, never have said no. When I learned, I never said no to Jonathan. I would rephrase it and try to find the positive words. So instead of saying, don't do that, I'll say, let's think about doing it this way, okay? Rather than saying no, because that works in my world. It may or may not work in your world, okay? But try as much as possible to stick with positive words, positive phrases, and not negative ones. There's a lot of negative stuff that we say and we're not aware of it. This is the second slide I want to talk to you, second model, serious illness conversation guide. These are the ways that I would hope that your healthcare provider speaks with you and that you would speak with your loved ones. And again, some of the basic stuff that we had first talked about, can you help me to understand what's important to you? Can I share with you what I understand, what's going on? Or if we're not sure what's going to happen, this might be a way that you want to phrase it in your own words, something like that, okay? Especially when we don't know what's going to happen. Again, we're going to hope for the best. We're going to expect the best, not hope for it. We're going to expect the best, and we're going to plan for the worst, okay? And here are other things that I hope your loved one, your healthcare practitioners will say to you, and that you might say with kindness to the person who is on the receiving end, okay? And really in any situation, what I found so very, very difficult is that it's all unpredictable and unknown. There is no concrete path to follow. I wanted a concrete path, there isn't one. And that can be hard, right? So we want to find words that are going to help people to deal with these kinds of things. If your health worsens, what are your goals for you yourself and for your loved one? What are your biggest worries? What gives you strength? Where does your strength come from? And what brings joy and meaning to your life? Does your life just revolve around your loved one's illness, or are you replenishing your own jug? And I hope we have time to get to that in this presentation. So here are some other things that you might consider saying. We don't need to talk about them all because they're all here. You have access to them. And when you're dealing with yourself, so many things that I've talked about, you need to do for yourself too. Okay, what do you need to do to look after yourself, to deal with your own thoughts and emotions of what you're living with, of the realities of your life at this point in time, and can you find joy in there? There are things that people have said to me over the years. I don't know how many times I've heard people say, I don't know how you do it. Drives me crazy. I wish I had a penny for every time I heard that. I'd be a millionaire. Really? Is that of help to me? To me personally, no, it's not of help to me. That's sympathy. And this, I find, is where you look at the difference between sympathy, empathy, compassion. Who's just going to offer empty words? Who's going to be there? Who's going to be able to acknowledge what it is that you feel and then be very glad that they're not experiencing it? And who's going to be able to step in your shoes for a while and walk the path with you? Who's going to offer compassion? And I'm sure you've all heard these things. You know, oh, Jonathan's so lucky that God gave him to you. God really blessed you by giving you Jonathan. I tell you, I want to have a talk with that person's God one of these days. All of these other things that people say, perhaps you found them of comfort. I didn't particularly find them of comfort. I'll tell you a little bit about Ava. Ava was from a poor background, an immigrant to Canada, brought her children, and she was alone, supporting them. She had a really bright son who was 16 at the time, and he actually had already been picked out to go to a specific university. He already was in line for a scholarship for that university. And that would have been the first time that anyone in Ava's family had gone to any kind of higher education. And her son, when he was 16, just shy of his 17th birthday, walking down the street, got hit by a bullet and was rushed to the hospital. And Ava came from a very strong faith group that believed in miracles, and they believed that if they prayed hard enough, that her son would survive. Her son would live. Well, the son lived. And when Ava told me this story, she brought me to the corner of the room, facing the corner, looking around to make sure no one could see us, could hear us. And she's bowed down and she's saying, you know, everyone tells me what a miracle it is that my son is alive. My son is functioning like a baby. He has temper tantrums that I can't control. He's wearing his 4-year-old sister's clothes. I don't feel lucky. Am I a bad person? So sometimes people are trying to offer comfort. Is it of actual comfort to the person that we're speaking with? So many things get in the way of having effective conversations, meaningful conversations, conversations that are said with kindness. And these are some of the barriers, things that get in the way of having meaningful conversations. Just a couple of don'ts. Don't, as you probably know, if you've lived long enough, you know, don't ever assume anything about anybody, and don't ever assume anybody understands a single thing you said or everything that you've said. That most people do not follow multiple instructions. I don't know how many times I've been asked for clarification when I've spelled it out in an email and the person just hasn't bothered to read through the entire email or to go through it again. Instead, they want me to provide them with the information again that I've already provided to them. So remember, emotion before logic. Do people have the capacity to process and learn new things? As the day progresses, brains get tired, people get tired, and they may not be able to process information in the same way. And don't assume that they're going to remember anything, and don't assume they're going to forget anything. Because it's, as we know with what we've heard with elephants, they remember. So maybe someone's going to remember things you wish they hadn't remembered. And something I think that I have to remind myself of is the last point on this slide. Don't jump in and do it just because I can do it a lot faster, that I can fix it. I need to sometimes just step back and breathe and let Jonathan take an hour to do what I can do in a couple of minutes, because that's how long it may take him to do what he needs to do. Again, anything new here? No, just different phrases. Depending upon your cultural background, eye contact may be looked for, may be sought. Eye contact may be avoided. So take your cues from the people that you might be interacting with who perhaps come from a different background than you do. Also, don't assume that they may follow those traditions. They may be very different thinking as an individual. For anyone who's living with neuro impairment of any kind of neuro condition, routines and structure, lifestyle are so important. Exercise, routine, social interaction, routine, staying positive, feeling that you are of value. And again, these are just a recap of things that might be helpful to say to anyone that you're speaking to, I think, who's dealing with something that's tough. Okay. How do you offer help and support? What can I do for you right now? I don't know what to do for you. Can you give me something to do? When you are grieving, when you are in crisis, it's hard to identify all that needs to be done. Can you, as someone one step removed, identify something and say, if it's all right with you, I'm going to make supper tomorrow night. Or if it's all right with you, I'm going to clean your bathroom. I hate cleaning bathrooms, so I'm going to clean yours because I know you don't want to do it either. So what can you do that is tangible, that's not intrusive, but may be of help and provide some comfort in a different way? Don't say, I'm going to the store, can I get you anything? Because you won't remember. To say, I'm going to get eggs and milk and bread. Do you need any eggs, milk, or bread? And then you'll see people go through that mental list in their head. Oh, do I have eggs? Do I have milk? Those kinds of things help to guide these kinds of helpful conversations. And as Tom Arrington said, you know, some days are good days, and some days you learn. I guess another phrase to say that is, you know, you don't learn from your successes, you learn from your failures. And there's a lot of room for failure in communication. And when we're living with neurological conditions, you need to find resilience. And what is resilience? I want you to look at this petunia. Petunias are not native to Canada. This seed, this petunia seed, somehow found a little hole in the border between the asphalt on the bottom right, transitioning to the curved sidewalk at the top. This is the entrance to the long-term care facility where both of my in-laws lived until they died. And here you can see that it found this little hole, and it not only grew there, it's thriving there in this very hostile environment where it should not be thriving. And so again, from Viktor Frankl, we choose our own attitudes, we choose our own path, we choose our own way we're going to respond. And when we can't change what's happening around us, we're challenged to change ourselves and to develop the resilience, the elasticity, the bounce, flexibility. And we have to be reminded when we go on a plane or we go on a boat, don't we? Put your life jacket on first, put that oxygen mask on first, look after yourself first so that you can better help those that you want to help, okay? How do you take that punch and get up again, okay? Finding that elasticity. And a very well-known writer, Jodi Picoult, reminds us that the human capacity for burden is like bamboo. I didn't want this life. I didn't choose this life. I in no way wanted this life, but it's a life that I was given. And that our capacity to change, to accept burden, and our capacity for burden is far more flexible than we'd ever think. And I want you to think about Tigger. If you remember Tigger, if you haven't read Winnie the Pooh in a long time, if you are not familiar with Winnie the Pooh, look it up at the library. It's wonderful stories. And while they are children's stories, they're not children's stories in that there's so much to learn in Winnie the Pooh. And if you're fortunate enough to find a copy of the book that's called The Tao of Pooh, T-A-O, The Tao of Pooh, it's a lovely, lovely, insightful read. So here is well-known and beloved Tigger. And what's so special about Tigger? This is Tigger's song. This is the first part of his song. Tiggers are wonderful things. Their tops are made out of rubber. Their bottoms are made out of springs. They're bouncy, trouncy, flouncy, pouncy, fun, 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 fun. But the most wonderful thing about Tiggers is I'm the only one. Yes, I'm the only one. And what a celebration of being different, being able to bounce, being able to come back from things. Stuff happens, it happens to all of us. Are we able to bounce back, to make it fun, to find the joy in every day, even when it's been a bad day? We want to enhance our own resilience through things that help our body. And we know use it or lose it. And that doesn't just apply to our body, it applies to our brains and our social circles. Keep them intact, work on them. They take work. And I'm finding the older I get, the more work it takes. Okay? Try to find laughter every day. Find something to laugh about, to release those endorphins, make yourself feel good. Instead of doing negative things when you're angry, can you do something positive with it? Can you try to channel it, to jetson it into something that is positive? Okay? And look at things outside of your comfort zone, something new and different, not just focused on your own little world and what you're comfortable with or what you need to know. What's something that's going to nourish and enhance you? And read things, talk about things that perhaps you don't want to talk about, like all of the things that we talked about today. You may not want to talk about them. You may not be ready to talk about them. Perhaps it's time to start learning about them so that when it's time, you will have the right questions. You will be able to think things through in a way that's meaningful for you. There is support out there if you look for it. Doesn't always mean you want it or that you're going to accept it, but it's there for you. And in that, all of that stuff that you may hear, you may find those nuggets and kernels that help with your own ability to cope with the day-to-day. So with your resilience, how do you keep your jug full and your gas tank topped up? How do you do that? Those things that we just talked about. So at the end of every day, I have to do a little reflection, a little breath. Am I depleted? Am I going to bed with all of the stuff that I didn't do hanging over my head? Or am I going to go to bed knowing that today I did the best I can? Did I take time to look after myself? Probably not, but I'm going to try better tomorrow. And here, the idea of the cracked jugs, water gardens. It's a little story. A lady is walking down to the river to collect water, and she brings two jugs, one in each hand, and one is perfect and whole, and the other is cracked. And on the way down to the river, the whole jug is berating the cracked jug. And he's saying, oh, I'm a beautiful jug. I'm whole and complete. I bring back every drop of water the mistress puts in me. And the cracked jug is thoughtful and quiet. And on their walk back to the house, the cracked jug says, if you look at your side of the path and you look at my side of the path, you'll see that the mistress planted seeds on my side of the path. And when we walk back to the house, I watered those seeds, and now my garden is blooming. So we're not perfect. We don't have all the answers. Every day is a journey. Take your cracked jugs, fill them up, and enjoy the ride. Okay, because there are things, as we know, we're not going to be able to change. How can we live with them? How can we build our resilience to make the best of today and live with hope for tomorrow? And that basically concludes this part of it. I did have some slides here that move more into some of the difficult conversations as we are approaching end of life. But I understand from Elaine that you are going to be having a session that addresses palliative care in June. And what we're going to see on these next slides that you'll have access to is part of that journey of this ongoing series of conversations, where first, when you're not living with the condition or you're in the early stages, you go from, well, this is what I want, this is what I'm projecting. And then you have the lived experience of this condition, of the medications, of the treatments, how your body responds to those. And now you have a much better sense of what you're dealing with and what may be coming down the road. So I think of it as coming from a complete novice to experienced to expert. And the closer you get to end of life, you develop the expertise in what is right and what is not right for you. And again, some of the resources there that'll be able to walk you through. And I did touch on grief, very difficult conversations to have. Withdrawal or withholding treatment, they're very different things. That might be something that you want to address in June, or something that you may want to start looking up. What do they mean? What is achievable? What is not achievable? So remember, to palliate means to comfort and to ease. That's what we're looking for with palliative care. And the rest of the slides, what our goals are, change over time, what we're looking for, where do you want to live, where are you going to need to live, how soon in advance do you need to start planning. We are at a time in our society where the sooner we start to plan, the better. We don't have years. As the end stage of the baby boomer generations here, there's not place for me in long-term care. Jonathan's waiting list for group home, 20 years, 25 years. I have one gentleman who's been on the list for 32 years to get into a facility because he's not deemed, it's not a crisis situation. So do you know the language that's going to help you to get placement in a facility or help you to get the care you need? And admission to long-term care is not a failure. Asking for help does not mean that you failed. It just means the needs have increased, and it's more than one person can do, okay? So here is OPA and some of the choices and decisions that we had to make at about the 6-month mark before he died, right? And here you can see he's with his first great-grandchild, but is not actively holding the baby. The baby's just been propped there so that we could get this picture. And I realized the picture was for my benefit, not for the family's benefit, but I didn't grow up with grandparents. And so for me, the idea that my grandchild had great-grandparents, and in fact, this child was born with a great-great-grandparent, was really something new to me, was not something that I had seen in my life experiences. Is this a reasonable question to ask? It certainly is. And something that I think we want for ourselves and we want for the people that we love, okay? And a lovely photo that the family agreed, wanted me to share of their mom's final journey. This was a family that I helped with multiple complex issues to be able to come together in terms of of what was best for Isabel at as she approached her last hours. And again, who can be part of the circle of love and of care? And don't exclude children. People want to protect children. They don't need protection. They need information shared in a way and as much as they want to know. And that's it. And sometimes, like you can see here, these grandchildren wanted to be hands-on. Another grandchild could not do that. She drew pictures for Grandpa, and that's what worked for them. So don't exclude children. Again, possible resources, things that you may want to consider looking at online that may be of help to you. All right. And I got it all done within the allotted time.
Amazing.
So thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Maybe stop sharing and your screen, and we can kind of go back to the full room if that's okay. And as Diana said, it should just be at the top. I'm thinking where it'll have a prompt for you
The
to
top
stop.
right, close. Can you see me?
I can still
Oh,
see
you
your
can hear me,
screen.
but I can't see you. Okay, hold on.
So we
Screen
just need-
sharing.
And you want to just stop the screen sharing.
Okay, so let me just turn that off. Stop share.
There we go.
Ah, there we are.
You did it.
Okay.
Well, yes, so I was privy to seeing her slides before you did, and I saw the breadth of information. So kudos to you, Diana, for getting that all in, and really thank you for your time and your expertise today. You've provided us with a lot of information and a lot of tips, and I'm hopeful and fairly confident that there will be a pearl or two for everyone, because everybody's situation is so different. So what resonates with one doesn't resonate with somebody else, but I'm hopeful that between the actual philosophical kinds of things to think about, as well as the tangible do's and don'ts and the future resources that you might tap into, that this has been helpful. And you know, when we have the title Must Have Conversations, you know, as you were talking, I'm thinking, well, it's conversations with the person with the health condition, and it's conversations with the healthcare team, and it's conversations with the family, and then it's conversations with yourself. So it's all of those things that you really have provided us with some tools to start thinking about on our own. So
I have to tell you, Elaine, that I do this as a 1 day or a 2 day workshop. So if you were not able to keep up, if you were overwhelmed, you were overwhelmed, and I apologize, but there was so much, and I couldn't bring myself to narrow it down more. I thought you needed to know what's out there and what you can search for that may be helpful for you in your situation.
Yeah, the breadth.
So yes, it was a lot.
Well, I with sincere appreciation, thank you for your time.